I sat alone in my dimly lit room, my eyes glued to the computer screen in front of me. I was searching for some new horror content to keep me entertained for the night. As I clicked on links and dug deeper into the dark corners of the internet, I began to feel a sense of unease wash over me. It was as if someone or something was watching me. I tried to shake off the feeling and continued my search. That's when I stumbled upon a website that sent chills down my spine. The site was full of disturbing images and videos, the likes of which I had never seen before. I couldn't look away, even though every fiber of my being was screaming at me to shut down my computer and run away. As I scrolled through the content, my heart rate began to increase. The images and videos seemed to be getting more and more violent and gruesome by the second. I felt like I was being sucked into a vortex of horror and there was no escape. Suddenly, the screen went black. I tried to restart my computer, but it wouldn't turn on. Panic set in as I realized that I was trapped in my room with whatever dark force had taken control of my computer. I heard a low, guttural growl coming from behind me. I turned around slowly and came face to face with a shadowy figure. Its eyes glowed red in the darkness and its twisted grin sent shivers down my spine. I tried to run, but the figure was too fast. It grabbed me by the throat and lifted me off the ground. I struggled to breathe as its grip tightened around my neck. I knew that this was the end for me. As my vision began to fade, I realized that I had made a grave mistake by venturing too far into the dark depths of the internet. I was paying the ultimate price for my curiosity and my thirst for horror. The figure's grip around my neck tightened even more, and I could feel my windpipe being crushed. My eyes bulged out of their sockets as I gasped for air, but there was none to be found. The figure's face was a twisted mask of malice and hatred. It seemed to take pleasure in my suffering, and its eyes bore into my soul with a terrifying intensity. I tried to plead for mercy, but the figure just laughed in response. Its laugh was a high-pitched, maniacal sound that sent chills down my spine. I knew then that there was no escaping this nightmare. As the figure continued to squeeze the life out of me, I felt myself slipping away into darkness. I wondered if this was what hell was like, a never-ending nightmare of horror and agony. Just when I thought it was all over, the figure suddenly released me and vanished into thin air. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air and trying to make sense of what had just happened. My computer flickered back to life, and the screen displayed a message that read, "Curiosity killed the cat." It was a warning, a reminder that some things were better left unexplored. I stumbled out of my room, my heart racing and my body drenched in sweat. I knew that I would never be the same again after what I had witnessed. The horrors of the internet had consumed me, and I was just lucky to make it out alive. From that day on, I made a vow to never venture too far into the dark corners of the internet again. I knew that there were things out there that were beyond my comprehension, and it was best to leave them alone. But the memory of that night would haunt me forever, a reminder of the dangers that lurked in the shadows. I knew that I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death, and I would always be grateful for the second chance that I had been given. But even though I had made a promise to myself to never explore the darker parts of the internet again, I found myself constantly drawn back to it. The memory of the figure that had almost killed me, and the thrill of discovering something new and terrifying, was too much to resist. As time went on, my searches became more and more intense. I found websites that dealt with the occult, satanic rituals, and unspeakable acts of depravity. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't help myself. One night, as I was exploring a particularly disturbing website, I felt a cold breeze blow through the room. It was strange because all the windows were closed, and there was no logical explanation for where the draft was coming from. Then I heard a voice, a deep and guttural sound that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at the same time. It said only one thing: "You shouldn't be here." I tried to close the website, but my mouse wouldn't respond. The voice continued, "You have seen too much. You know too much." The room began to spin, and I felt like I was falling into a dark void. The images on the screen started to come to life, the figures in the videos crawling out of the computer and into the room. I tried to scream, but no sound would come out. The figures started to approach me, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Suddenly, the room was filled with a blinding light, and the figures vanished. I was left alone in the room, shaking and covered in sweat. I knew then that I had gone too far. The horrors that I had witnessed were not meant for mortal eyes, and I had foolishly played with forces that were beyond my control. From that day on, I stayed away from the darker parts of the internet. I knew that the figure that had almost killed me was still out there, and I didn't want to tempt fate again. But the memory of what I had seen haunted me, and I knew that I would never be the same again. The horrors of the internet had consumed me, and I was just lucky to have survived. Despite my promise to stay away from the darker parts of the internet, the fear of the unknown and the thrill of discovery was too strong to resist. I couldn't shake off the memory of the figure and the terrifying experience that had followed. I found myself returning to the darker corners of the web, searching for something that could explain what I had seen. The websites I visited were more disturbing than ever before. They contained dark secrets of the world, unimaginable atrocities committed in the name of power and greed. As I continued to delve deeper into the darkness, the lines between reality and fantasy began to blur. I started seeing things, hearing voices, and experiencing strange occurrences. I knew that I was losing my mind, but I couldn't stop. One night, as I was scrolling through a website, I found a link that promised to reveal the ultimate truth about the universe. I clicked on it, and it took me to a website that was completely black. Suddenly, a message appeared on the screen: "Do you want to know the truth?" I hesitated for a moment, but my curiosity got the better of me. I clicked on yes, and the screen went completely white. It was like staring into the sun, and I had to shield my eyes. Then, the voice from my previous experience spoke again. This time, it was louder and more menacing. "You have been chosen," it said. "You will be the vessel for our message." I felt like I was being pulled into the screen, my body dissolving into pixels. The world around me disappeared, and I was transported to another dimension. The figures from my previous experience were there, waiting for me. They were joined by others, creatures that defied description. They surrounded me, their eyes glowing with an intense light. The voice spoke again: "This is the truth. The world is not what it seems. There are forces beyond your understanding, and they control everything." I wanted to run, to escape, but my body was paralyzed. The figures started to move closer, and I felt like I was about to be consumed by the darkness. Then, the room was filled with a blinding light, and I was back in my bedroom. My computer screen was black, and there was no sign of the website that had brought me to this nightmare. But I knew that it wasn't over. The voice had warned me that I was the vessel for their message. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew that it couldn't be good. From that day on, I lived in constant fear. I knew that the horrors of the internet had finally caught up with me, and I didn't know how to escape. The world was not what it seemed, and the forces that controlled it were beyond my understanding. I was just a pawn in their game, and I knew that I would never be the same again. Days turned into weeks, and the fear that had consumed me only grew stronger. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I tried to live my life as normally as possible, but the memory of the figures and the voice haunted me every moment of the day. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and couldn't focus on anything else. Then one night, as I was lying in bed, I heard a sound. It was a soft whispering, like someone was speaking in my ear. I sat up, but there was no one there. I turned on the lights, but the whispering continued. It was like 1,000 voices, all speaking at once. I tried to block it out, but the voices were getting louder and louder. Then, suddenly, the whispering stopped, and the room was filled with a blinding light. I shielded my eyes, but I could feel something pulling me towards it. I felt like I was floating, and then I was transported to another place. It was a dark void, and I was alone. The figures and the creatures were nowhere to be seen. Then, the voice spoke again: "You have been chosen. You are the vessel for our message." I tried to speak, to ask what the message was, but my mouth wouldn't move. The voice continued: "The world is not what it seems. There are forces beyond your understanding, and they control everything. You have seen too much, and you must be silenced." Suddenly, the figures and the creatures appeared out of nowhere. They started to move closer, their eyes glowing with a sinister light. I tried to run, but my body wouldn't respond. The figures and the creatures were getting closer, and I knew that I was about to be consumed by the darkness. Then, the room was filled with a blinding light again, and I was back in my bedroom. My computer screen was black, and there was no sign of the figures or the creatures. But I knew that they were still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike. I had seen too much, and they would stop at nothing to silence me. From that day on, I lived in constant fear. I knew that the forces that controlled the world were beyond my understanding, and I was just a pawn in their game. The horrors of the internet had consumed me, and I knew that I would never be the same again. The figures and the creatures were still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike, and I didn't know how to escape. I was trapped, a prisoner in my own mind, and I knew that the darkness would consume me completely. As the days went on, the fear only continued to grow. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting the figures and creatures to appear at any moment. But something strange started to happen. I began to notice that the people around me were acting differently. They were all looking at me with a strange look in their eyes, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they knew something that I didn't. One day, as I was walking home from work, a man approached me. He was tall and had a strange look on his face. He said that he had a message for me, but I had to come with him. I didn't know what to do. I was scared, but something inside me told me to follow him. So, I did. We walked for what felt like hours, and eventually, we arrived at a small cabin in the middle of the woods. The man opened the door and motioned for me to go inside. The inside of the cabin was dimly lit, and I could barely see anything. But as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The figures and the creatures were there, all gathered around a table. They looked up as I entered, and I could see the same sinister glow in their eyes. The man who had led me there stood behind me, and he spoke, "You have been chosen. You are the vessel for our message." I tried to run, but the figures and the creatures blocked my way. The man's voice continued, "The horrors of the internet are only the beginning. There are forces beyond your understanding, and they control everything." Suddenly, I realized that I was not the victim in this horror story. I was a pawn, just like everyone else. The figures and creatures were not the enemy, but merely the messengers. The man's voice continued, "You have been chosen to deliver our message. You must spread the word and warn others of the dangers that lurk in the shadows." As I looked around the cabin, I realized that the figures and creatures were not there to harm me, but to guide me. They were the protectors, and I was the chosen one. From that moment on, I knew that my mission was clear. I would spread the message and warn others of the horrors that lurked in the shadows. But as I left the cabin and made my way back to civilization, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. The plot twist had turned my world upside down, and I didn't know what to believe anymore. But one thing was clear, the horrors of the internet were only the beginning, and the darkness was still out there, waiting for its next victim. As I walked through the dark forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. Every sound was amplified, and every rustle in the bushes made my heart race. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling of being watched only intensified. As I reached the edge of the forest, I heard a blood-curdling scream. It was coming from behind me. I turned around, and my worst fears were realized. The creatures and figures from the internet were standing in front of me, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Their distorted faces and twisted bodies made my stomach turn, and I knew that I was in grave danger. I tried to run, but it was too late. They had already surrounded me, and I was trapped. The creatures and figures closed in on me, their hands reaching out to grab me. I screamed, but no one was around to hear me. Suddenly, the world went black. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel the creatures and figures still around me. I heard whispers, and their voices were filled with malice and hatred. "You have failed us," they said. "You were supposed to spread the message, but you failed. Now, you will pay the price." I tried to fight back, but it was useless. They were too powerful. Their grip on me was unbreakable, and I knew that I was doomed. Just when I thought it was over, the darkness lifted. I was back in my room, safe and sound. But something was different. I felt like I was no longer alone. As I looked around, I saw that the creatures and figures from the internet were still with me. They were no longer just images on a screen, but physical beings in my room. The terror had followed me from the internet to the real world, and I knew that I would never be safe again. From that day forward, I lived in constant fear. The creatures and figures were always there, watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. The internet had opened a door to a world of terror that I never knew existed, and now, I was trapped in it forever. As the creatures and figures from the internet surrounded me, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light, I knew that I was doomed. I had failed them, and now they would exact their revenge. But just as they were about to strike, a bright light engulfed the room. The creatures and figures screamed in agony and disappeared, as if they were never there. I was left alone in my room, trembling with fear. I tried to calm myself down, but something was off. The room didn't feel like my own anymore. The walls were different, the furniture was rearranged, and there was a strange smell in the air. As I looked around, I saw that I wasn't in my room anymore. I was in a different place entirely, and it was nothing like anything I had ever seen before. The walls were made of a strange, pulsating substance, and the air was thick with a sickly sweet smell. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. It was as if I was paralyzed, stuck in this strange, otherworldly place. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I saw something moving in the distance. It was a figure, slowly making its way towards me. As it got closer, I could see that it was a person, but something was off about them. Their eyes were glowing, and their movements were jerky and unnatural. As the figure reached me, it leaned in and whispered something in my ear. It was a message from the creatures and figures from the internet, and it filled me with a sense of dread. "You thought you could escape us," the figure said. "But we are always watching. We are always waiting. And we will never let you go." With those words, the figure disappeared, and I was back in my room. Everything was as it should be, but I knew that it was only a matter of time before the creatures and figures returned. I tried to tell myself that it was all just a nightmare, but deep down, I knew that it was real. The internet had opened a door to a world of terror that I could never escape from. And just as I was about to give up hope, I heard a knock at the door. It was a group of people, and they were holding a device that looked like it was from the future. "We've come to rescue you," they said. "We've been monitoring the internet, and we saw what happened. We've come to take you away from here and into a new world, where the internet can no longer harm you." I couldn't believe it. It was too good to be true. But as I looked into their eyes, I saw that they were telling the truth. With a sense of relief, I followed them into a new world, where the internet no longer had power. And as we left the old world behind, I knew that I was finally free from the horrors that I had once thought were inescapable. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to hit the like button and consider subscribing to our channel for more great content. Your support helps us continue to create and share valuable information with you. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next video.